Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road. It's the first touch, strong connection. It lays deep in your soul. Feel the kindness strongly coming. 'Cause you can achieve your goal. Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road.
Hi, this is Nancy Ureld, and welcome to Nancy's Psychic View on the high road to humanity. And boy, have we got a show for you today. We have a lovely lady here today. Gwen McPhail is here, and welcome to the high road, Gwen.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for including me.
Oh man, this is cool. She's written this cool book, My Place Among Them. The pen name that she uses is J. Stanion. And you guys, this is wow, what a historical book this is. It's her latest work. She's an opportunity to reflect on the past and the present. She draws from the well of history and uncovers life lessons that resonate more profoundly than ever in today's world. We're going to be talking about the Native Americans. This literary time machine, My Place Among Them, guides us through history and offers invaluable insights on resilience, culture understanding, and the intricate workings of politics and bureaucracy. And I got to tell you, this is a cool story because this is passed down from your great-grandfather. He wrote this, but it never was published. Then it went to your grandmother, from what I understand. Then it went to your father. And then in 2020, you decided to put this together. I mean, I want to hear your story. I want to hear what happened. And then I'm just going to read this really quick before you even tell your story. This is such a beautiful book. I just want to read this. This is The Creek. So sit back and relax a second. Sitting Bull was one of the principal leaders of the Lakota people. He had fought against white soldiers and settlers for many years and had foretold the defeat of Custer and Little Bighorn, also called the Battle of the Greasy Grass, and even moved to Canada to escape, and I didn't know this, the U.S. cavalry later. He returned to live on the Standing Rock Reservation, where an Indian agent ordered his arrest by agency police. When Sitting Bull refused to mount a horse and be led away under arrest, a fight ensued, and Sitting Bull was fatally shot. And that's the beginning. So I want you to tell the story.
Well, at that point, there had been they called him a Messiah who came from out west, possibly Arizona, New Mexico area, whose name was Boca. And he was sort of like a traveling preacher man in the white world, but he encouraged the Native Americans. He taught them to do something called the ghost dance. And in the ghost dance, they wore shirts that had very specific symbols painted on them, and they danced a very specific way. And he taught the believers in the ghost dance that if they danced the ghost dance, wore their shirts, then the white man would be flooded away, washed away from the earth, and their dead relatives and all the dead buffalo would come back to their lands, and they would rule the plains again like they had in the past. So there were, of course, a lot of Native leaders who did not believe in the ghost dance, who understood that the whites were here to stay, that it was going to be a not good future for the Native Americans. But there were those that wanted to leave. They were so unhappy. Perhaps they had lost family members and they were just, devoid of any hope. And so they did participate in the dance, and it was loud, and it was not understood by the white people, so they were afraid of it. Right. They were afraid when they saw the ghost dancers, and they remembered the history of the massacre on the Greasy Grass, and Custer's death. So it was all very frightening. The whites were afraid, the Native Americans were afraid. And much like today, in the middle of it was a lot of newspaper reporters who wanted to sell papers back east. And so sometimes the stories, it didn't matter if they were true as long as they sold newspapers. And so it built up and built up, and the government was a little bit afraid of the Native Americans. And so what happened was, after Sitting Bull's death, the rest of the people who lived there on the Standing Rock Reservation, led by a chief called Spotted Elk, who the white man called Bigfoot, they decided that it was in their best interest to travel to Pine Ridge Reservation in order to be safe. Pine Ridge was fairly settled. Red Cloud had been to Washington. He was well respected by the white leaders. And they wanted to talk with him about what did the future hold, where can we find hope?
Right.
So they actually, in the middle of winter, I believe Sitting Bull was killed on the 15th of December.
Yeah, it was
in the middle of winter.
Yeah, I think you wrote in here, it was December, well, oh no, December 29th is what I read, or is that when the battle was?
That was Wounded Knee. That was the
Okay, I'm
massacre
sorry.
at Wounded Knee.
My
No,
bad.
that's all right. But anyway, after Sitting Bull was killed, the people there where he was murdered decided it was best to travel from Standing Rock to Pine Ridge, which is a significant journey, several hundred miles. And Bigfoot was he had pneumonia. He was already ill. But they gathered up and they started traveling. Right now, there is a memorial ride being undertaken by the youth of the Lakota tribe, redoing that same ride. They ride on horseback in the snow,
Wow.
in the cold. And so those people traveled. They were trying to get to Pine Ridge Agency and join up with Red Cloud. But unfortunately, on the path, on the trail, they came to Wounded Knee Creek, and they ran into what was now known as the 7th Cavalry. It was what was left, plus all the new recruits of Custer's 7th Cavalry.
Right.
And they asked them to surrender, so they did. So they surrendered and they camped that night. But then the next morning, the soldiers were, riding around the camp. Certainly they did not like the Native Americans. They were angry because their leader had been killed. And somewhere a gun went off. There's lots of stories about how it happened. But as soon as the gun went off, the soldiers began to fire, and that resulted in the massacre of so many men, women, and children, mostly women and children and older men who were not armed, there at Wounded Knee Creek. And that was known. For a long time, it was actually called the Battle of Wounded Knee. And then over time, as it revealed that it was not a battle, it was actually just a massacre.
Yeah, I read in your book, and I want to just mention that a lot of the soldiers were killed from their own men firing at them because it was such an erratic, massacre that even their own were massacred. It was like like somebody shot the gun and then they just went nuts.
Yeah, that's sort of what happened. They were there was so much angst against the Native Americans, and they were so caught up in the fury of what was going on at the time. The soldiers just fired randomly, just everywhere. It didn't matter if they killed children. It didn't matter if they killed women. And in some cases, they actually shot their own men.
Yeah.
In that case, yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. This is horrible. And I'm just going to ask you, and I made it through most of this, but I didn't get through the whole book. And what a wonderful read. And it's so well written, you guys. I have to tell you, just from me reading that, you should realize it. But there's so much cool information in here. But, what was documented about this? What does history say? I was just curious about this. At the time that it happened, was there any kind of repercussion because of what they did, because of them killing hundreds of Native Americans, Indians at this point?
No, at that time, there was truly a government policy. They wanted to eradicate the Native Americans. Their goal was to to simply overwhelm them, because there were so many white settlers that wanted land. They wanted the East. We had colonized the East, and they were wanting to move west and move west and move west. And there was only so much land, just like there is today.
Yeah.
There's only so much so many places to build homes and build farms. And so there was no, in fact, actually, that some of the soldiers were given medals within days of that for what they considered bravery in battle.
Right. I read
Even
that.
though later other soldiers came back and said, well, maybe it wasn't a battle. Let's really admit that there was not a lot of braves there that were armed. Let's really look at what happened and think twice. But it took 2 more generations, really, in order for the white government and society to accept that it wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The natives were fighting for their homes, not that they weren't just out to kill white people. They were fighting for their lives, their place to live.
It's interesting how history repeats itself. We see the same thing going on in Israel.
Yes.
Hamas wants to get rid of the Jewish people. It's the same thing that happened to the Native Americans. They wanted to just take their land and get rid of it. It was all about land. It was all about land. And,
It's all about land.
yeah, and I just want to say something as I was reading this, and I was, all I could think of is, how could they have stood there and killed all of those people? The value of human life, how could they in their heart and soul do that? I mean, you really have to be hardened to do something like that. I'm just, mentioning that it was a horrible thing.
Well, and it is so it's still true today, regardless of what group you're talking about. And you see the comment that the way to get to power frequently is to divide the people around you by convincing them to hate each other.
Right.
And then they fight each other while you ascend to power. And I think that was exactly what was happening at that point.
It's crazy. Let's rewind a little bit. Let's talk about this, because from what I can gather, from what I understand, is this was your great grandfather, and he documented all these things that happened. And I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but he couldn't put it out there because he was a teacher. He was being paid by the government to teach the Native Americans, to teach the Indians. And I know it's not proper to say Indians, but that's what.
No, actually, that was one of the first questions that I asked Quentin. I said, please forgive me in my book because I call you Indians. And he just laughed and he said, it's okay. It's what we call each other.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. They poked fun at the white people for calling them Native Americans. He said, oh, that's just y'all's word for each other. He said, you can call us Indians. Of course, the appropriate term is indigenous people, but they are okay with Indians, and it is used historically in the book, so they're okay with it.
I'm really glad that we talked about that, because I want to say Indian, and the world has become crazier and crazier. So let me just understand this. So he wrote everything down. And how much of this, like when you received it, I guess I want to hear the history a little bit. When you finally got this documentation of what happened, what did you receive actually?
Well, I actually have my great grandfather's typed copy of the manuscript. It was
Oh,
written with a typewriter on the back of a car dealership stationery. So if you can imagine, he was living in Colorado at the time with his family. He had some health issues in his life, which you heard, you read about in this story.
mhm.
And so periodically he would have to take a little bit of time off and try to recover from the health issues. So at one point in Colorado, he decided to document the life of this young boy that he had met. He had been a survivor. The boy was a survivor of the massacre at Wounded Knee.
Right.
He had met my great grandfather in the classroom. They had gotten to know each other, and so in 1902 he had the opportunity to sit down and write the story. And he wanted to write it because he wanted to document what he knew was going on that was wrong within the system of the
Right.
government. But he was afraid to publish it because he would probably lose his job.
Right.
So he simply typed it, and it was in a, I still have the box that it was in.
Oh my gosh.
And when he passed away, it passed to my grandmother, who was a nurse. So I don't remember much about her. We didn't see her as often as I got older, especially. I remember her a good bit as a child. I remember her talking about meeting Iron Horse, the young man, him being at their back door one morning by surprise. He caught them by surprise coming to visit.
Okay.
So we remembered the stories about him. My great grandfather thought a great deal of him and his resilience and his persistence in his studies, and his honesty and openness seemed to be the traits that were then passed to my father to look up to and to admire in this young man.
Wow. And his
So
name is John Ironhorse. I want to say, as you go through the book, his name is John Ironhorse, and he was adopted because he really had no family, as the story starts.
right, and we don't really know. I don't know. I don't think that Ralph, my great grandfather, probably did not know, because he was from an area that was off from Pine Ridge. He was from the Standing Rock area originally. And so we're not real sure what his family was like. We don't know if his father had been killed previously, or if his family was killed there at Wounded Knee.
Right.
That was all something that my great grandfather did not know.
Interesting, interesting. So I want people to know Pine Ridge Reservation is in South Dakota. So the story starts out in South Dakota. But I just would like to know, how long did your great grandfather teach at the reservation? And he became the superintendent. I mean, he went on to be the principal, the superintendent of the Federal Indian Service on reservations in Arizona, Wyoming, Montana, and North Carolina. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that and how that all came about?
Well, partly probably because my great grandfather did want to do a good job, and he did want the natives. He wanted to teach them. He wanted them to become business people. He wanted them to succeed. But he was also caught up in trying to raise a family. He had to have a good salary himself, and so just like anybody today, he wanted to move up the ladder to some
Right.
extent.
Yeah.
And so each time that something came along, he would apply for positions that were a little bit higher. And sometimes he got them, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes his health got in the way. He didn't seem to have a lot of patience with people that were simply in the system to climb up the ladder. He did
Not
not.
too good. Right, right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he didn't tolerate that. And so I think sometimes he might have been, uh, Dad told stories about some of the letters, and we have some of the letters that he wrote to the government talking about how the Indians were being mistreated in some cases. They were not. I remember in one particular place where he was moved to. He was moved from a job that he had to a new school, and when he got there, the boys in the boys' dorms were sleeping 2 and 3 to a bed, and yet just outside the entrance of the school, there were beds that were just they just hadn't been repaired. They had not been maintained, so they were laying out there, and all it would have taken would have been for someone to take the young boys in the school, take the equipment that was there at the school, and teach them the carpentry skills, and they could have repaired the beds, and then each child would have had their own beds. And yet the leadership at that particular school was not doing that. They were just saying, oh, we'll just sleep together, we don't care.
So
And so that,
not to interrupt you, but that reminds,
no, that's okay.
well, when I was in Germany and I went to the concentration, where they had the concentration camps, they
Mhm.
showed the small beds and they said the people were stacked. And that's what this
Yeah.
reminds me of. That's how bad it is. Now, was your father able to correct that and oversee that, step in and change things there?
In some of the places where he was able to change it. In some cases, I remember there was one, and I don't have my notes with me right now. But there was a school in Oklahoma, I believe it was, where even the natives were so opposed to each other that they did not want to be together. So he actually, in one classroom, I remember reading the letter, he had to hang blankets between the children of the two different tribes because they didn't want to be taught together. And so in cases like that, he wasn't able to bring about change. So sometimes he just left because it was so discouraging to
Right.
see the amount of money that was being spent, and yet it wasn't necessarily making progress for the Indians that he was supposed to be helping. And so he would leave. He would apply to be moved to another place.
Did he live his life complete? I don't want to give away your whole book.
Oh no, that's okay.
But
Yeah.
did he eventually move off? Because he lived on the reservation, because he taught on the reservation.
Yes. Yes.
So that became his way of life. Did he live there? Did he live out his days there?
Yes, he did uh on various reservations. He was moved around and moved around and moved around, but he did eventually pass away before he was able to retire. And
Right.
so he actually died on a reservation, and that was his life.
Yeah.
That was he and his first wife had dedicated their lives to that.
Right.
His second wife was not as dedicated to the Indians, and in fact, she ended up choosing to live in Denver rather than be with him on the reservations at the end.
His first wife was Native American, is that right? Or part Native American?
She was part Native American, we
So
believe.
you
That's
are.
one of those things in doing my research about her. I actually found two birth certificates with her name on them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and one was on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and her parents were listed as unknown, both of them. And the other one was from Ithaca, New York, which at that time you didn't go into the hospital and have your children and then get a nice little birth certificate from the health department like you do today. Families had to buy the health certificate. So it was possible to purchase a health certificate. And so I'm not sure which was which. But I chose to believe, because of her dedication to the Native Americans, that perhaps she did have some of the genetics there that made her feel so strongly that they were her people.
Well, yeah, and you have a little bit of that appearance yourself.
Well, I know that in my heart, I've always felt like at least I
Yeah,
was part Native American.
yeah.
I have admired them and their way of life and the values that they had. About They did not accumulate wealth. That was not their goal in life.
Right.
They accumulated what they needed, and then they gave away what they didn't need to others who needed more.
And that's the way it should be.
Yes.
If we could change things, and make them be that way again. Now, has your family, you said you did speak with them before you put the book together. Has your family stayed close to a lot of the families, or has that been too many years and it's a separation, or?
Yeah, it's been so many years. My grandmother, because she was a nurse, she traveled a good bit ultimately, and she just simply kept the book. She did not make any efforts to publish it. I don't She wrote a small journal. She was good about journaling every day. I actually have her last journal. But it was and I guess to an extent, maybe she was a little bit like her father in that she jotted down what happened day to day, but it
Okay.
was sort of factual. I went and took care of this man. He had this. I needed to do that.
Hmm.
I had dinner with these people. So she moved around quite a bit. And when she finally settled in Connecticut, and then when she died, the book passed to my father. So, and that was in 1976.
Wow.
So for all those years in between, from 1902 to 1976, there was no contact that I know of maintained between the Native Americans and my grandmother.
So this all took, I just want to kind of let the audience know the time period that we're discussing that's in the book. It starts in 1878 and goes to 1936. And
Right. Right.
I mean, this is, I have to say, I mean, I see some awards here. Do you want to talk about the awards that this book has won real quick here?
Well, it's won a number. I don't even remember all of them. It
I
just
can read them.
recently.
And you can say, there's one that's the Literary Titan Book Award. It won.
Right. That's true.
I'm trying to read these. This one says, my eyes aren't as good as I used to be. Looks like the HTC 5-star award. Is that right?
That's the Historical Fiction Company's 5-star Readers Award.
Yeah.
That was given because the readers selected it as a well-written, easy to read book.
Yeah.
It's not in writing, I learned that there's a difference between literary novels and historical novels. Literary tend to use bigger words, longer sentences, more I call it flowery writing.
Yeah.
Whereas I tried to keep mine very simple because it was simple. You know, they struggled to speak English. I'm sure that my grandfather spoke Lakota, although I can't type that or write that into the book. But it was always a very simple, very basic communication. So that's how I tried to write the book.
I love it.
So
And there are
thank you.
pictures. I just want people to know there's pictures. There's the dance house at Potato Creek you have in here. You have the one I really liked. I have to tell you, the one that really hit me was Liz with Spotted Horse's wife. I don't know if you guys can see this, but here's this little white baby with this dark Native American lady. I mean, that's classic. I love it. I love it. You know, I'm so glad you wrote this, or he wrote this, and that did you expand it a little bit, I guess, on things, or did you keep it? How did you do it? I just want to ask that question. Is that okay?
Well, he did not include anything about himself in his book
Right.
because he was working to tell the story of the Indians and the struggles of this young boy as he came up through the education system. That was what Ralph, the original author, was so focused on, was the tragedy of the education program of the government to the Indians.
Mhm.
So that was his focus. So he didn't really talk a lot about himself, but yet as I presented it to publishers and talked to agents and people that were interested in it, in some cases they had problems. And one of the problems that I faced was, in this day and time, there is so much judgment of people about other people, and they look at you and say, oh, you're white, how would you know about a Native American boy? Or you're a white woman, you can't tell this story, you weren't there. And so I felt like, in
How
order to
sad.
make it is sad, it
Sorry,
is
I
very.
just have to say that. That's really, I mean, were you shocked? Were you surprised? I bet you
I
were.
was very surprised at that. Yes. I was very surprised to know that there are actually people called sensitivity editors today who will read a book and tell you, oh, no, this might get too much public reaction. You probably better not say this.
Isn't
Or
that
you
the
better.
idea?
Well, that was sort of the way I thought. But
Oh my
so
gosh.
the chapters about my great grandfather, who is Carter Heath in the book,
Mhm.
they were written based on his employment records and the copies of the letters and things that we have that he wrote.
Mhm.
So that was my way of putting him into the story.
Mhm.
I wanted people to understand that there was a relationship between he and John, and that he was also living a life as a young father trying to survive in this situation of bureaucracy versus poverty versus the aspirations of a young man who sees his own world dying but wants to be successful in whatever world there is in the future.
Mhm.
So the chapters about him are based on his employment records and letters, but I wrote them as
Okay.
opposed to editing his story about John.
And do we know what became of John?
I do not. The last story that I know as a child, he came to visit my grandmother at their home in Connecticut, and she spoke of, how handsome he had become, but yet how sad he was because obviously his wife had passed, and that he was moving on, and that she didn't know that she would see him again. She married shortly after that, and then in World War I, the man that she married experienced mustard gas in the war,
Oh, wow.
and so her life also took a tragic turn for a little while. Um, I don't know a lot about what it was like, but I do know that it changed her life with two little boys, my dad and his brother, dramatically because of what it did to him physically and emotionally from the war.
Wow.
So I think that ended all contact between them and John.
How sad. What has your family said? What has been the reaction from your family about the book? I bet they're proud of you for finally putting it together. Like it finally got written, right?
Right. They're very thankful that it was finished because it was Dad's goal. And so they are very tickled that what Dad set out to do finally got done. Definitely. My mom struggles to read it. She'll read it a little while and then she'll put it down. She hasn't finished it yet because it brings back memories of for her as well.
Yeah.
So it's a little hard for her to read because she remembers what my dad went through with his own father. So that's a little bit of a struggle there for her. But
I see. It's I was talking to you a little bit before the show about the Native Americans, the Indians, and I lived in New Mexico for many years and God, 25, 30 years. Now I'm aging myself. And now I'm here in Arizona. And here we are. I see the reservations. I've been on the reservations. I just want to talk about how the Indians are doing today. It's interesting. I see the big casinos. And I've been on the reservation and you go and the housing's terrible and there are no trees and there's no vegetation and it looks like a ghost town. And then you go to the casinos where they're making all this money. It's a odd outcome of their life. Yeah, they still perform their ceremonies and they learn their native languages still. It's kind of what do you think about what's happened to them? I mean, that's what I see. What do you see?
well, I see the same thing, and yet but I also see that they I think the experience of this book for me was a real eye opener in what you call generational trauma,
Okay.
because what I see now is that finally the Native Americans are beginning to recover, just now beginning to actually recover. They were forced, they lost their identities, they were forced to give up their language, they were forced to they were forbidden even to dance at the time that this
I
book was
know, it's
written.
crazy. I know when I read this, you guys, it's really good and it's honest and it's heart-wrenching. And I'm so glad you wrote this because this story needed to be told. It's been
Yeah, it
swept under
did.
the rug. Don't you feel that way?
Yeah, I do, but yet I do see that finally there are individuals within each of the tribes, and I think I certainly different tribes are struggling harder than other tribes, but they are seeing the importance of teaching their youth their language, teaching their youth their culture.
Yeah.
The buffalo are being returned
Yeah.
to the reservations, and so the children are learning um to slaughter the animals and to get their food, their nutrition from the natural things that their people are used to. And when you look at what we eat today, when you go in the grocery store and it's meat that you don't know where it came from, and
Right.
it's products that it's like it maybe has a little bit of corn in it, but you're not really sure exactly how much. And so they're finding their own way back to their culture, and I think that is the best hope, because it's not money that they need, it's
No.
it's the return of their culture and their way of life that they need.
To the land. Yeah. And so do we.
And so do we,
And
right?
so
Yeah,
do we. I mean, we got to get
yeah.
back. I feel that way, back to basics, back to having a garden and, growing our own food. I agree with you. I go to the grocery store and I don't want to get a whole thing, but it's hard for me to buy meat because I don't, and I get sick and I have to really watch it. And even vegetables are sprayed with different things. It's crazy, and that's why it's so important. And I want to mention the buffalo real quickly. I'm from Albuquerque, and there is a place in right outside of town there, and there's all these buffalo near the Sandia reservation, and it's really nice. And if you're in that area, you can go see the buffalo. There's quite a few that roam out there, and so you're
Oh,
right.
cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I had never, growing up on a farm in Ohio, I had never seen a buffalo. Moved to New Mexico, and yeah, they have them. But it's really crazy because on one side of the street, and this is the truth, you see all the buffalo, and there's a big open space for them, and then there's a highway, and there's the casino. And it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like, what in the world is going on here? But maybe they take the money from the casinos and they put it back into the land and buying more land. And I've heard that too. That some of the monies have gone back into purchasing up more land. And I was a
Oh,
real
that's cool. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and so I sold land to the Native Americans, so I know they've been buying it back up. Interesting how it comes around, right?
Well, and they're going back to that the Lakota particularly were known as horse people. They were riders, and the horses were important to them, and they've come full circle. They're back to doing the races that like they used to do, and those are things that help the young people to deal with
Life.
life. Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it, that
Yeah.
I'm sure that they themselves as young people probably walk out and go, we were wealthy beyond belief as in the ancient times of having these wide open spaces, the beauty of nature. We lived how we wanted to live, and now here we have money in the white man's category, and yet we're not happy, we're not fulfilled. And so they're finding their places with the horses and the racing and the old way of lives that make them more at peace. And I hope, I know that a lot of them battle with drugs and alcohol,
Mhm.
and what I see is that a lot of that is the spirituality of the horseback riding and being on the land again is helping those young people. I think
Yeah.
it would help a lot of white people too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly color. There is no color to me.
Right.
I don't look
No.
at people with color. And I just want to mention this picture of you with the horse in the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're a horse person too. And here's the picture. There's a picture here too. And this is the picture. I want you to talk about this if you would, please. So,
The ledger art, that's
yeah.
Quentin. Quentin is the first of the Lakota that I spoke with on the phone. He's the one who said, who I told, please forgive me, I'm a white lady. So if I ask something dumb, just laugh a minute and then give me an answer. He is a very well-known ledger artist,
Okay.
but he also struggles with drugs and alcohol. And so, because he's probably close to my age, 60s. So he's come up through this time of nothing but poverty, not the return to their culture and their way of life, struggling with, and as an artist, I'm sure that he is much more impacted. I've always heard that artists are more sensitive to things, and
Mhm.
so I've got a number of his pieces, and he does beautiful work. So when I ask him about that, you can see in that picture the little boy is John.
Okay, let me pull this up. Okay, guys.
Okay, so the little boy is John, and then rider, of course, I believe Quentin intended that to be like the spirit of the Lakota coming back to him to help him get through the school, the educational system, what he was going to suffer through. And then the train is symbolic of the train ride where he leaves the reservation and comes east to Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So it was something that had a huge impact on his life. And so that was what, that's the piece that Quentin did for my book.
That's great. What an honor, huh?
Yes.
How
It
cool
tickled
is
me
that?
that he was willing to do that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that you came to join us today. And I just want to congratulate you on putting it together. I mean, I'm sure that your relatives are up there going, okay, all right, she did it. So I'm sure you're being celebrated in the heavenly realms right now. So I want to commend you for putting it together and getting the information out there because, it's history. And they're trying to get rid of our history right now. And it's really important
Yeah.
that this history be told because this is exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Do you agree? I don't know.
Well, and there will always be a battle because Earth has limited resources, and there will always be those people who want more, and
I
we
hope
will
not.
always battle against that. Yeah.
See, and I hope
So
not. My hope is that we all like start to share because if we would have just been like the Native Americans, what a wonderful example. What a wonderful example they were. We could have lived like that, but we brought in alcohol, which they couldn't tolerate, and guns, which just killed, so many people. Anyway, I just, back to basics. Yeah, we got to get back to where we were. I'm so glad you came on the show. How can people get in touch with you if they would like to ask a question?
well, I have a website, www.jstanion.com.
Okay.
And we didn't talk about where the name came from, but J is my father's first initial,
Okay.
and Stanion is my great grandfather's last name.
Oh,
So
okay.
I
All
use
right.
their names as the author's names because truly they are the writers.
Okay.
I was just kind of the final editor to put it together. So it's www.jstanion.com. They can email me directly off of that website.
Okay.
There's a link there if they're interested in buying the book that it takes them straight to the page on Amazon to order the book.
It's a
So,
beautiful book, you guys. Well, it's
well,
just
thank you.
fabulous. And I'm so glad you came on today. And I'm going to leave the audience. It is Christmas time. It is December 22nd. And I'm going to get this show out. And you don't know this, but I channel Archangel Gabriel. And so I channeled a message this morning and I'm going to read it for humanity, for everybody today. And then we'll get out of here and sit back and relax. This is what he says. Humanity is at a crossroads. The next few years will change things for the collective. You will grow as a people and achieve a higher state of vibration after the wars cease. You will discover that the fighting was not what you had been told it was about. Humanity is waking up to the lies of a few who have affected many. Goodwill will come out of all of the chaos you see. It's not at all hopeless for you to see the light is peeking through and will become brighter and brighter. People don't want war and conflict, destruction and crime. The vibration is already beginning to shift. Blessings to all.
Oh, how cool.
So there is
Yes.
hope. There is hope, and that was his hopeful message today, and I wanted to leave that. And the other thing I want to say really quick, guys, I'm going to be teaching angel communication in LA. It's going to be at the Conscious Life Expo. It's in February the 9th through the 12th. I'll be in Florida. Also talking about the angels and connecting with God and connecting with the angelic realm. And that's March 16th and 17th. And I will be in Manhattan in May 16th and 17th. Come and see me. And I'll teach you guys how to connect with your guardian angel. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so glad that you came to join us today, Gwen. And I wish you a very Merry Christmas, a very happy holiday.
The same to you. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
All right, you guys. All right, you guys, we're getting out of here for today. I wish everybody a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Everyone take care and God bless.
just hit the